The symphony hall was flawless. Beethoven's Ninth echoed through the vaulted ceiling, and Victoria stood in the wings, watching her husband conduct with the precision that had made him famous. Dr. James Hartley, celebrated neurosurgeon by day, amateur conductor by night, the man who saved lives and created beauty. She smoothed her silk gown, preparing to join him for the donor reception, when her phone lit up with a message that shattered her world into irreparable fragments. DNA results available. Click to view secure document. Victoria's finger hovered over the screen. She'd ordered this test 3 weeks ago, driven by a gnawing intuition that had kept her awake for months. Now, standing in the golden glow of Chicago's most prestigious concert hall, she opened the attachment. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. The orchestra swelled to its crescendo. Victoria watched James take his bow, watched the audience rise in thunderous applause, watched her 12-year-old son Oliver clap enthusiastically from the front row beside James's mother. Oliver with his sandy hair and crooked smile. Oliver who had James's intensity but none of his features. Oliver who she now understood was not her husband's child. But here was the twist that made Victoria's blood run cold. Oliver wasn't her affair. He was her secret, a secret even she hadn't fully known. 12 years ago, they'd struggled with infertility. After 5 failed IVF attempts, they'd turned to a clinic in Toronto, renowned for its success rates. The procedure had worked. Oliver was born. They'd never questioned the miracle. Victoria pulled up her medical records on her phone, documents she'd requested weeks ago when Oliver's routine blood work had revealed inconsistencies. She'd been a biology teacher before Oliver was born. She understood genetics. She read the fertility clinic's consent forms with new eyes, saw the clause she'd missed buried in page 17. In cases of multiple embryo failure, donor genetic material may be utilized at physician's discretion to ensure viable pregnancy. They'd used donor sperm without telling her, without telling James. The clinic had closed 6 years ago amid scandal. The doctor had fled to Singapore. The records were sealed. Victoria looked at her husband, now shaking hands with the symphony's board president, his face radiant with post-performance euphoria. She looked at Oliver, talking animatedly with his grandmother, gesturing the way he always did when excited about music. James didn't know. Oliver didn't know. And Victoria had just discovered she'd spent 12 years raising a child conceived through deception. Not her deception, but deception nonetheless. The applause faded. James caught her eye across the hall, smiled that warm smile she'd fallen in love with 17 years ago. He mouthed, "You okay?" She nodded, a lie that tasted like ash, because she wasn't okay. She was standing at the epicenter of a truth that would detonate everything. Her marriage, her son's identity, James's understanding of fatherhood. And unlike James, who could cut into a brain with confidence, Victoria had no idea where to make the incision that wouldn't kill the patient. The reception was a blur of handshakes and champagne. Victoria moved through it mechanically, her mind racing through impossible calculations. Tell James tonight? Wait? Never tell him? Each option was a different kind of catastrophe. Mom, did you see Dad's solo with the cellos? Oliver appeared at her elbow, bow tie askew, eyes shining. It was perfect. Dr. Morrison said Dad could have been a professional conductor if he wanted. Victoria touched his face. This boy she'd carried for 9 months, nursed, raised, loved with every cell in her body. He was wonderful, she whispered. You're crying, Oliver said, concerned. Are you sad? No, baby, I'm just moved by the music. Another lie. She was crying because she was looking at her son and seeing a stranger's genetics, wondering whose eyes he really had, whose musical talent was expressing itself through his small hands. James materialized beside them, still in his conductor's tails, face flushed with success. My 2 favorite people. What did you think, buddy? Best concert ever, Oliver declared. Can I conduct next time? When you're older and you've practiced as much as I have. James ruffled Oliver's hair, then leaned down to kiss Victoria's temple. You're quiet tonight. Headache? Just tired, Victoria said. Let's get you home then. Mother can take Oliver for ice cream. James signaled to his mother across the room. 30 minutes later, Victoria and James were alone in their Lincoln Park townhouse, the kind of home that screamed success, original hardwood, contemporary art, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. James poured himself a scotch, loosened his bow tie. That went better than I expected. The Beethoven was challenging, but the orchestra really. James, I need to tell you something. He turned, read something in her face that made him set down the glass. What's wrong? Is it Oliver? Your mother? It's about Oliver's conception. James went very still. What about it? Victoria handed him her phone, the DNA results still on screen, alongside the clinic documents she'd uncovered. She watched his face as he read, watched the color drain, watched comprehension dawn like a slow-motion car crash. I don't understand, he said finally. This says I'm not Oliver's biological father. The clinic used donor sperm. They didn't tell us. I only found out when Oliver's blood work came back with anomalies. I started digging. James sat down heavily on the leather sofa. Donor sperm they used without consent? It's buried in the paperwork. Page 17, subsection C. We signed it, James. We just didn't read it carefully enough. 12 years. 12 years, and he's not mine. Victoria felt her heart crack. He is yours. You're his father in every way that matters. The genetics don't. Don't. James held up a hand. Don't tell me genetics don't matter. I'm a neurosurgeon. I understand genetic predisposition, inherited conditions, biological imperatives. Everything I thought I knew about my son is built on a lie. Not a lie. A mistake. A clinical error that we didn't. Did you know? The question came sharp as a scalpel. Before tonight, did you suspect? Not until 3 weeks ago when the blood work. 3 weeks? You've known for 3 weeks and you're just telling me now? Victoria's composure fractured. I needed to be sure. I needed to understand what happened before I destroyed our family with suspicions. Our family, James laughed, a hollow sound. Is there anything else? Any other secrets you've been sitting on for 3 weeks or 12 years? How dare you? I went through 5 failed IVF cycles. I took hormones that made me sick. I did everything to give us a child, and yes, I signed consent forms because I trusted the doctors, trusted the process, trusted that we were building something together. I am not the villain here. Neither am I. James stood, pacing, but I'm the one who's been living a lie. I'm the one who looks at Oliver and sees myself in his mannerisms, his intelligence, his love of precision. Except it's not me he inherited. It's some anonymous donor whose genetic material is expressing itself in my son. Our son. Is he? Genetically, he's yours and a stranger's. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Victoria felt something inside her calcify, harden into a defensive wall. You're talking about Oliver like he's a failed experiment. He's a 12-year-old boy who loves you, who thinks you hung the moon. Does biology really erase 12 years of fatherhood? James ran his hands through his hair. I don't know. I don't know what I think right now. I need time. Time for what? To process this. To figure out what it means. It means we deal with it together. We don't tell Oliver, we don't let this change how we parent him, and we move forward. James looked at her, and for the first time in their 17-year marriage, Victoria saw a stranger. You've had 3 weeks to process. I've had 3 minutes. Don't tell me how I should feel. He grabbed his keys from the hall table. Where are you going? Somewhere I can think. Don't wait up. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that was somehow worse than a slam. Victoria stood in the silent townhouse, surrounded by the carefully curated life they'd built, and wondered if truth was a structural load their marriage could bear. 3 days passed. James stayed at the hospital, citing emergency surgeries and research deadlines. He texted about logistics, picking up Oliver from school, checking on his mother, but nothing personal. Victoria maintained normalcy for Oliver, who noticed his father's absence but accepted the excuse of a medical conference. On the 4th day, Victoria received a call from an attorney. Mrs. Hartley, my name is Carolyn Pierce. I've been retained by your husband to discuss arrangements regarding your son's custody should you and Dr. Hartley decide to separate. Victoria's hand tightened on the phone. Excuse me? Dr. Hartley wanted to explore his legal standing given the recent revelations about Oliver's parentage. I've advised him that despite the biological circumstances, his 12 years as Oliver's father established clear paternal rights. However, he asked me to contact you about potential mediation. He sent a lawyer before talking to me? Mrs. Hartley, I understand this is difficult, but my job is to... Victoria hung up. She called James immediately. It went to voicemail. She called again, voicemail. On the 3rd attempt, he answered, Victoria. You hired a divorce attorney? A family attorney. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. James, we need to talk face to face. This is our marriage, our son's future. You can't outsource this to lawyers. Silence. Then, I'm coming home tonight. We'll talk after Oliver goes to bed. The call ended. That evening, James arrived at 7. Oliver launched himself at his father with the uncomplicated joy of a child who still believed his world was stable. Dad, you're back. Can we work on the model bridge tonight? I figured out the tension problem. James hugged him, and Victoria saw the conflict play across her husband's face, love warring with newly awakened doubt. Not tonight, buddy. I have work to finish, but this weekend, I promise. After Oliver went to bed, they sat across from each other at the dining table, the same table where they'd celebrated anniversaries, hosted colleagues, helped Oliver with homework. Now it felt like a negotiating surface. I've been thinking, James began, about what's fair to Oliver. And I love him. That hasn't changed. But every time I look at him now, I see the deception. I see the clinic that played God with our genetics. I see the forms we should have read more carefully. I see you keeping this secret for 3 weeks. I explained why I waited. And I understand intellectually, but emotionally, Victoria, I feel betrayed. Not by you, exactly, but by the situation, by the randomness. I've spent my career fighting chaos, imposing order on damaged brains. This feels like chaos I can't fix. Victoria leaned forward. So what are you proposing? Separation. Temporary, to start. I stay involved in Oliver's life, maintain the father role, but you and we need distance. I need to figure out if I can move past this. And if you can't, then we divorce amicably. Split custody. Protect Oliver from the ugliness. There's nothing amicable about destroying our family over something neither of us controlled. You're right. We didn't control it. But now we know, and I can't unknow it. Can you honestly say you haven't looked at Oliver differently since you found out? Victoria wanted to lie, but she couldn't. Yes, I've looked at him and wondered whose eyes he really has, whose musical talent is emerging, whether the stranger who contributed half his DNA was good, kind, healthy. It's terrifying not knowing. Exactly. So maybe distance is what we both need. Victoria felt tears burn her eyes. I don't want distance. I want my husband to fight for us. I am fighting, James said quietly. I'm fighting to stay rational instead of angry. Fighting to protect Oliver from my confusion. Fighting to figure out if the man I thought I was, Oliver's father, your husband, can exist with this new reality. They separated the next week. James moved into a corporate apartment near the hospital. They told Oliver that Daddy had a special project requiring late nights, easier to stay nearby. Oliver, 12 and perceptive, didn't quite believe them, but children are skilled at accepting lies that preserve their comfort. Months passed. James maintained his father role with mechanical precision. Every other weekend, Wednesday dinners, school events, but the warmth had bled out. He interacted with Oliver like a dedicated mentor, not a father. Victoria watched her son notice the shift, saw Oliver try harder to please James, saw the confusion in his eyes when his efforts met competent but distant responses. Mom, is Dad mad at me? Oliver asked one night. Victoria's heart shattered. No, baby. Never. He's just stressed with work. He doesn't hug me the same anymore. He doesn't laugh at my jokes. Victoria pulled him close. Dad, this boy caught in adult wreckage he didn't understand. People go through phases. It'll get better. But she didn't believe it. 1 year after the separation, the divorce papers arrived. James proposed joint custody, generous financial support, continued involvement in Oliver's education and activities. It was fair, reasonable, and utterly heartbreaking. Victoria signed them in the kitchen at 2 a.m, tears dripping onto the legal documents that officially ended her marriage. The divorce finalized 6 months later. Oliver, now 13, had developed an anxiety disorder. He had panic attacks before transitions between parents, saw a therapist weekly, and had stopped playing music, the passion he'd once shared with James. He reminds me too much of Dad, Oliver told his therapist when Victoria asked why he'd quit orchestra. And Dad doesn't really care anymore anyway. The therapist called both parents in for a session. Oliver is internalizing blame for your separation, Dr. Reese explained. He believes he's done something wrong, that he's the reason his father is emotionally distant. James shifted uncomfortably. I've never said that. Children don't need words. They read energy. and Oliver reads your withdrawal as rejection. I'm not rejecting him. I'm at every school event, every parent conference. You're present physically. Emotionally, you've built a wall. And Oliver, being 13 and perceptive, has concluded the wall exists because of something wrong with him. Victoria watched James process this. She saw the neurosurgeon's mind working, analyzing, seeking the pathology. What do you recommend? James asked finally. Honesty. Age-appropriate honesty. Oliver is old enough to understand that his conception had complications. He's not old enough to handle it alone. You need to tell him together, frame it properly, and both reassure him that he is loved and wanted. Victoria felt ice in her veins. You want us to tell him he was conceived with donor sperm, that James isn't his biological father? I want you to tell him the truth before he constructs his own false narrative. Right now, he thinks he's fundamentally flawed. The truth is, the adults in his life faced a medical challenge and made decisions that led to his existence. That's not his burden to carry. James and Victoria looked at each other across the therapist's office, and for the first time in a year, they were aligned. Not yet, James said. He's too young. He's suffering now, Dr. Reese countered. Waiting won't make it easier. They left without deciding, but 3 months later, Oliver attempted to run away. Victoria found him at the train station with a backpack and his savings, $247 in birthday money. I was going to Dad's, Oliver said, tears streaming. I thought if I showed up, if I made him talk to me, I could fix whatever I broke. Victoria held her sobbing son in the middle of Union Station, commuters streaming past, and knew Dr. Reese had been right. That weekend, she and James sat Oliver down in the family therapist's office. Oliver, Victoria began, there's something we need to tell you about when you were born. They explained it carefully, the infertility, the clinic, the donor sperm, the mistake in communication. They watched Oliver's face cycle through confusion, shock, hurt. So Dad isn't my real dad. Oliver's voice was small. I'm your real father, James said, and Victoria heard emotion crack through his carefully maintained control. I've been your father since before you were born. The biology doesn't change that. Then why did you leave? Why did you stop hugging me? James closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. Because I got lost in the biology. I got confused about what mattered, and I hurt you because I was trying to protect myself from feeling hurt. That was wrong. You deserved better. Do you still love me? Oliver whispered. James crossed the room, knelt in front of his son, and pulled him into the kind of embrace that had been missing for 18 months. I never stopped loving you, not for 1 second. I just forgot how to show it. And I'm so sorry. Oliver sobbed into his father's shoulder, and Victoria watched her ex-husband hold their son, and saw the wall finally crumble. The healing wasn't instant. They continued family therapy. James worked on rebuilding emotional intimacy with Oliver. Victoria navigated single parenthood with renewed focus. But one evening, 6 months after the revelation, James showed up at the townhouse with his cello. Oliver mentioned he quit orchestra, James said. I thought maybe we could play together, just us. See if we can find the music again. Oliver's face transformed. They spent 2 hours in the living room, James on cello, Oliver on violin, making mistakes and laughing about them. The sound of a relationship being rebuilt note by note. Victoria watched from the kitchen and felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope. 3 years after the divorce, Oliver was 16 and thriving. He'd returned to orchestra, made regional finals, and credited both his parents for supporting his passion. The anxiety had eased. The panic attacks had stopped. James and Victoria weren't remarried, that bridge had burned, but they'd become effective co-parents. They attended concerts together, celebrated birthdays together, and slowly rebuilt a friendship from the ashes of their marriage. One evening after Oliver's solo performance at a youth symphony showcase, the three of them went for ice cream, a tradition from Oliver's childhood that had somehow survived the wreckage. I've been thinking, Oliver said, chocolate chip cone dripping onto his hand, about my biological father, the donor. Victoria and James exchanged glances. What about him? Victoria asked carefully. I'm curious. I mean, I know Dad is my dad. That's not a question. But genetics are interesting. I'm applying to pre-med programs. Understanding my full genetic background could be medically relevant. James set down his cone. You want to find him? Maybe, eventually. Is that okay? Victoria saw James struggle with the question, saw the old fears flicker across his face. Then she saw him choose differently than he had 4 years ago. "It's more than okay," James said. "It's your right. Your biology belongs to you, Oliver, not to our mistakes or my insecurities. If you want to search, I'll help you." Oliver smiled, the crooked smile that belonged entirely to him, genetics irrelevant. "Thanks, Dad, both of you, for being honest, for staying in it even when it was hard." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "We didn't always handle it well." "But you handled it," Oliver said with the wisdom of a child forced to grow up too fast. "You could have kept lying, kept pretending. Instead, you told the truth and dealt with the mess. That's what love looks like, right? Staying for the mess." Victoria looked at James. He looked back. Between them sat the truth. They hadn't stayed married, but they had stayed parents. They'd failed at one structure but preserved another. "Yeah," James said quietly. "That's exactly what love looks like." 10 years later, Oliver was a resident in pediatric neurology, but following in James's footsteps despite their lack of genetic connection. Or perhaps because of it, proving that legacy is built through teaching, not DNA. He'd found his biological donor through a DNA registry, a classical pianist in Toronto named David Chen, who donated sperm during graduate school to pay tuition. They'd met for coffee, exchanged medical histories, and maintained occasional friendly contact. Oliver called him David, reserved Dad for James. Victoria, now 54, ran a nonprofit helping families navigate fertility treatment complications. She'd turned her pain into purpose, advocating for informed consent and transparent clinic practices. James, at 58, had retired from surgery but still taught. He'd never remarried. "I had my great love," he told colleagues who asked. "Didn't work out the way I planned, but it was real." On Oliver's wedding day, both Victoria and James walked him down the aisle, a symbolic choice that made Oliver's bride cry. In his toast, Oliver thanked them both. "My parents taught me that family isn't about genetics. It's about showing up, even when showing up is hard. It's about choosing each other, even when biology isn't forced the choice. Dad chose me every day after learning I wasn't genetically his. Mom chose truth over comfort. They both chose my well-being over their own pain. That's the definition of love I'm taking into this marriage." After the reception, Victoria and James found themselves alone on the venue's terrace, watching the Chicago skyline glitter against the night. "We did okay," James said. "Despite everything." "We did," Victoria agreed. "Took us a while to figure it out." "I'm sorry," James said suddenly, "for leaving when things got hard, for punishing Oliver for something that wasn't his fault, for throwing away our marriage because I couldn't handle uncertainty." Victoria looked at the man she'd loved, lost, and learned to coexist with. "We both made mistakes. I should have told you immediately about the test, should have trusted you to handle it. Would we have survived if we'd handled it differently? Maybe, maybe not. But we survived it the way we did, and that's something." James nodded. They stood in comfortable silence, two people who'd shared the most important project of their lives and learned that success sometimes looks different than you planned. "He's happy," James said. "That's what matters. He is, and he knows he's loved by both of us. And by David Chen, apparently. The pianist sends him birthday texts now." Victoria laughed. "The more people who love our son, the better." "Our son," James repeated. "Took me too long to understand that possessive. It's not about genetics, it's about commitment. You figured it out in time. That's what counts." Music drifted from the reception hall, Oliver and his bride's first dance. Victoria and James watched through the window, seeing their son, the one they'd accidentally conceived through a clinic's deception, the one they'd almost lost to their own fear, the one who'd taught them that family is verb, not a noun, beginning his own adventure in commitment. "Do you ever wonder," James asked, "what our life would have looked like if that clinic hadn't made their mistake? If Oliver had been genetically mine?" Victoria considered it. "Maybe easier, maybe harder. Maybe we'd have found different reasons to fall apart, or different reasons to stay together. The multiverse of might-have-beens. Not as interesting as what actually happened." James smiled, the first genuinely warm smile she'd seen from him in years. "No, not as interesting at all." They stood together as the song ended, as Oliver dipped his bride, as the crowd applauded. Two people who'd failed at marriage but succeeded at something harder. They'd raised a human being who understood that love is choice, commitment is daily, and family is whatever structure you build together. Genetics be damned. The silent fracture that had broken their marriage had somehow, impossibly, created a foundation for something more resilient, a family that survived truth. And in the end, that was the only structure that mattered.